right, that'll work.
And we're really glad to have Brian here. He's been a really great asset to the agents here in our region as well as the station, and certainly appreciate it. Brian, we're going to turn it over to you.
All right, how are y'all doing today? All right. Did everybody get enough to eat?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't want anybody going away saying they were hungry. All right, what we're going to talk about today is weaning and feeding. There are a lot of different questions that we get related to that time, whether it's dealing with the calves or dealing with the cows. So, what we're kind of doing is talk a little bit about both of them. Weaning. The idea behind weaning is to get the calf off of milk and get it to eating grass or some other type of feed. There are a lot of different strategies to do this. You can fence line wean them. You can just take the calves and take them totally away from the mother. You can use the plastic weaning device. And one of the questions that I get a lot is, which is the best way? Well, if we're going to go to research, it depends on which study you read as to which one is the best way to do it. The bottom line, I don't care which strategy you pick to wean your calves, but wean your calves. Whether it's totally separating them, whether you're going to use the plastic weaners, put them next to each other on the fence line. I don't care how you do it, just get it done. That's really the big thing, is we need to wean these calves. When do we wean them? What's the average age where you wean your calves? 6 weeks? 4 to 7 months? I know there are a lot of people out there that do it at 6 months. There are some people that do it at 3 months. What's the earliest that you can wean a calf?
I always thought 90 days. Those calves weaned at 90 days, you just don't do it well.
Well, you've got 90 days. You can wean a calf at 1 day. That's when most dairy people do it. Get colostrum in them, but then they put them on a bottle. How many of y'all like to bottle feed calves? Yeah, some people do. I personally, that's one of the big things that I don't like to do. Earliest possible time to have the rumen functioning properly to where the calf is not still reliant on milk, to where it doesn't have to have milk, is 3 weeks. So, if we go through and we look at early weaning, so from 3 weeks to about 9 weeks, early weaning, we get that calf no longer has to produce milk. So we're going to reduce the stress level on the cow. If we're feeding a lot of hay, we can stretch our hay out, because then that cow isn't trying to eat enough to produce milk, so she can cut back on her intake. So if we've got to stretch our hay out some, early weaning is a strategy that we can use. Depending on how we're going to do it, we can increase our labor costs. If you're weaning early enough that they've still got to be bottle fed, that's definitely going to take more labor. If you're splitting them up and feeding them, and you've got to feed 2 different groups, that'll increase your labor cost. And like I said, bottle feeding is something that I don't like to do. If you like to do it, I guess it could be a positive thing. If you don't like to do it, it's definitely negative. And then we get questions about cost. Depending on the strategy, there are some early weaning strategies that will actually reduce the cost of producing these calves. There are others which greatly increase the cost. I would say if you've got to put them on milk replacer, you're going to increase the cost. Whoops. Okay. Early weaning and permanent weaning. Now there are some strategies to pull the calf off for a few days to help that cow start cycling again, or for a certain period of time, and then put the calf back with them. Some people say it's a great thing. Some people say that then the cow doesn't take the calf back, and then you have bottle calves. So that's one of those things that's really questionable. But if you early wean, take that calf away totally, you decrease the demands for protein and energy of that cow by 30%, because she's still not trying to produce milk. Like I said, you can wean as early as 3 weeks. So 21 days old, that calf, the rumen, by that point is functioning. It no longer has to have milk. So when we start looking at early weaning, the big goal generally is to improve our reproductive performance. We're trying to get more cows rebred. Everybody wants, how many of y'all get 100% conception rate? One person? Y'all should all find out what he's doing and copy him. We wean 30 to 60 days of age is generally considered early weaning. When you start looking at responses, so how much benefit do we really get from early weaning for the cow? We get more response seen in getting first calf heifers rebred if we early wean their calves. When you think about that first calf heifer, she just had her first calf, tons of stress on her. Then she's milking, and she's still trying to grow. So the nutrient needs of that first calf heifer are higher than any other animal that we deal with. So if we can get that calf off of her, so she's no longer producing milk, she's just got to grow some more to get ready to get rebred for that next year, we can really increase our conception rates on those first calf heifers. Which animals are the hardest to get rebred? First calf heifers. So this might be a good way to look at something to do to get those first calf heifers rebred. When we look at a Nebraska study, we look at early weaning, at weaning 8 days before the start of a 42-day breeding season. Early weaning versus normal weaning, we saw an increase, or they saw an increase in conception rates in every group of animals when we look at early weaning. When you look at a Clemson study, looking at heifers that were weaned, we saw that increase in conception rates. Again, we're just going to keep going through this benefits of early weaning. We look at Hereford heifers and mature cows. Start looking at weaning weights. When you take, does this thing have a laser on it? Yeah. For first calf heifers, the calves that were weaned at a normal date, so there's a 50-day difference in the wean weight, they were only a little bit heavier than the ones that were early weaned, just 18 pounds, not a big difference. The mature cows, we saw a difference in the weight there. Now this could be, the early wean calves came off. That's going to create a new social dynamic in that herd. So that may be why that normal wean calves were a little bit lighter. By the time we got back to the weight of the calves, the early wean calves were heavier than the normal wean calves in both groups. And then when you start looking at the conception rates of these animals, we saw much higher conception rates in the early weaned animals. So we look at 88 pounds heavier. How much does that translate to when we look at selling those calves? 88 pounds it's a lot of money. And if you figure that out, so we've got 88 more pounds per calf times 40 calves, you really start talking about some big numbers here. There are some cost benefits from the way this study was run. You have now they took the calves off of those cows and put them on a diet, on a grain feed, concentrated feed, figured $75 per head. But then you got an extra 60 pounds at 205 days, and they figured this in at 95 cents a pound. And I'm pretty sure it's higher than that right now. Gives you an extra $57. Since we're no longer feeding those cows as much because they're not having the milk, we can reduce the cost of feeding our cows. So we're going to make somewhere between $47 and $82 more, and that's just with figuring this in at 95 cents a pound. And then you figure in how much benefit do you get, how much money are you saving if you increase your reproductive percent by 10%. If you go from 85 to 90% conception rates, you've really saved yourself or made some more money. Now, when we start looking at these, and I don't know how well y'all can see this in here, we start looking at practical considerations of early weaning. We want to get those animals, those calves weaned at least 30 days before we start breeding. If you've got an animal she's milking, and then all of a sudden you take her calf away and then try and breed her, we want consistency when we go to breed. So if you try taking that calf away, you think, she's not having to milk as much, but that's weaning is stressful on the cow too. It's not just stressful on the calf. So we want to get her over that stress period before we start going into breeding. So we want to breed at least 30 days before breeding. or we want to wean 30 days before we start breeding. Now, if you look at this, the way the heifers are managed, and a lot of times we see this cycle with heifers, they generally get bred early, or a lot of the times they don't get bred if you have a confined breeding season. So a lot of the benefits you see with this is going to be in your heifers. How many of y'all try and breed your heifers before you breed your cows? Get them a little bit early? Anybody? That's another strategy you might want to look at. If you get those heifers bred a little bit early, once they calve early in the calving season. It gives them a little bit extra time to get rebred and still stay in your herd. So you really have an opportunity for early weaning here because you can get those heifers weaned or the calves weaned off of the heifers and then still have plenty of time before you start breeding. Because of this normal curve where we see heifers calving earlier in the calving season that first time, they are ideal candidates for early weaning. Not to mention all the other benefits of getting that milk off of them so we don't have to put as much feed into them. If we start looking at late weaning, people that go 9-10 months before they wean their calves, the benefits from it, as far as I know, there aren't any. By the time you start looking at an animal that's 7 to 9 months old or even older, that it's more of a companion for the mother than actually getting any benefit from the nutrition. But that cow is still milking. The calf is still going to go up and nurse. I've seen 1,000-pound steers go up and still try and nurse because they were never weaned. So if you get them off of the cows, so you get that break in there, it's really stressful on the cow. When you start looking at a cow trying to milk for 9 months or 10 months after she's bred and then have another calf, so she's still staying in your herd, in that yearly herd. If we're looking at having a calf every 365 days, she doesn't get time to rebuild her body condition score. When you start looking at colostrum, you have to wean the calf for colostrum production to happen. If she's still milking when she has that next calf, you're going to have very little colostrum produced at all, which means your next set of calves is not going to be as healthy as they could be. It's high production cost. It takes a lot of energy to have that cow milked. Ask any dairy person out there or former dairy person. It takes a lot of cost to keep those cows milking. And if you're not getting any benefit from it, you're putting extra money into your herd and you're just wasting money. For the most part, there's no added gain. We don't see a benefit in gain or weight of those steers if we keep them on the cow longer. And like I said before, it can negatively impact your calf crop. The impact of weaning. We drop the nutrient requirements of the dam. Therefore, a short period of time, we drop the calf weight. When you first wean, you need to expect for that calf to lose some weight. Their nutrient intake is going to drop off. It takes a little while for the calves to get over that stress and get back to eating. That's due to a decrease in feed intake. The issue with this is when you look at a calf from 3 months old to about 8 months old, that is the most efficient time of their life. You can get more gain off of less feed at that point in time than any other point in their life. And part of it is because at that point in time, their maintenance requirements just aren't as high. If you look at an 80-pound calf versus a 300-pound calf, it doesn't take as much energy to maintain that 80 pounds. So because the nutrient requirements are lower at that point in time, you get more gain off of less feed because you're not having to support as much added weight. When we start looking at milk, this is just trying to look at what when you figure that calf is suckling and it's getting most of its nutrition from milk, milk is an awesome feed. 9.5% dry matter. It's mostly water, but it's 33% crude protein. It's 30% crude fat. It's 93% TDN as an estimate. No nutritionist has ever been able to develop a feed that matches these requirements that a calf will eat. It can be done, but then they don't eat it because it takes fish meal and blood meal and all types of other stuff to get the protein up that high. I've tried it several times. They don't eat it. I don't care how much molasses you put on it. if we just want to compare that to the feed that we generally wean on, when you look at weaning on the corn, the energy level, the TDN is up there about, it's fairly similar. You know, you're looking at 90% versus 93% energy. But there's a huge difference in the protein. You know, you're looking at 30% crude protein versus 7% crude protein. So they're taking a huge hit on the nutrients that they're taking in. If we look at really good fresh forage out there, tall fescue, average fescue, 14% crude protein, 70% TDN. They're taking a huge hit there too. So no matter what feed we're going to take them off of milk and put them onto this, we're going to decrease the nutrients that they can take in a day. The other thing that we have to remember is milk doesn't go through the rumen. When they're suckling, the esophageal groove closes, that milk goes straight into the abomasum, and it's digested just like a human would. You don't see it's not broken down in the rumen. When you start putting these other feeds in the rumen, whatever we put in is going to get changed, which in some cases is a benefit. You know, that's what allows us to feed things like urea and still be okay, because the rumen microbes will break down those nitrogens, that nitrogen, and change it. So if you look at a low quality protein source that we're going to feed these cows, like urea, all that is nitrogen. But the rumen microbes will break that nitrogen down and turn it into a medium quality protein that the animal can then digest. Which is a huge benefit for ruminant animals. The problem with that is if we take some really high quality protein like milk and actually put it in the rumen, they break it down and change it into medium quality protein that the animal then gets to digest. So we get some benefits from the rumen, but there also are some drawbacks, which is why it's great that we don't have to worry about that with milk. So we're back to our goals at weaning. We want to get that calf off of milk and eating feed as quickly as possible. We want to keep increasing the gain of the calf. We want to keep the calf healthy. One of the big things we first see when you start dropping the nutrients that animal's getting is a drop in the health status of that animal. Most of the time it's subclinical, but there is a drop in that health status. We want to do it as low stress as possible. You know, we don't want to go yell and scream at the cows. We don't want to yell and scream at the calves. We don't want to beat anything. We want to keep things as low stress as possible. And I think a lot of that is done with the handling of the animals, not so much, you know, whether they're totally separated or together with the dam. I don't think that's nearly as stressful on the animal as how we handle the animals when we're getting them to the chute, when we're working them through the pens. I learned to work cows in Texas with a rope and a post. We didn't have a head gate. You talk about high stress? It doesn't get any worse. And if you look at those animals and the gain and the performance afterwards, it drops off quick. So we want to keep the stress as low as possible. And then we let that dam, you know, she's no longer milking. We can let her regain body condition so she's ready to have that next calf for us. Pre-weaning. When we start looking at strategies, ways that we can do this. Creep feeding is an awesome strategy unless you're trying to do totally forage. With creep feeding, a lot of the times we have problems getting the animals to eat, the calves to eat that grain the first time. If you can let them let the mothers eat it with the calves the first few days, so the calf goes up and says, all right, mom's eating it so I can eat it too. You'll get your calf started on grain faster or whatever you want to feed them. When we start looking at what we're going to feed them, we want to try and keep it low starch. You know, our basis forages around here, we're going to have those animals eating forages. We want them to have the best digestibility of the forage as humanly possible, or as possible. If we start adding corn or wheat or barley into our mix, we're going to change the rumen microbes and we'll actually decrease digestibility. We'll stop those animals from being able to digest forages as efficiently. And that's something we don't want to do. So we want to try and keep it low starch. Dried distiller's grains, if you can get it, what's left over after they make ethanol or Jack Daniels or Jim Beam, whatever your preference is. Corn gluten feed is what's left over after they take corn and make high fructose corn syrup for Coke. Either one of those, the process that they use takes all the starch out of those. So you don't have to worry about it. It's still high in energy because of the fat content, but there's no starch. So you get high energy, high protein, but you don't have to worry about the starch changing those rumen microbes. Soybean hulls are also a wonderful feed, and they're probably the most complete straight feed that we can get. Their mineral profile is great. We don't have a problem with calcium and phosphorus ratios like we see in every other grain. They run about 7% crude protein. They're about 80, they test it somewhere around 85% TDN. When you actually look at the gain the animals get when we feed it, it feeds better than it tests. And that's because it actually enhances the digestibility. It changes the rumen environment and lets them digest forages better. So we get a boost in performance because of that. It's called forage-friendly fiber. So soybean hulls are a really great feed. If we want to look at high starch, if we're going, we're going to background these calves so that we can send them straight into the feedlot, and then they're going to know what the bunk is and they're going to know what to do once they get there. Corn, wheat, barley, any of your grains, white stuff. If you really want to get into the high energy feeds and start looking at byproduct feeds, cookie meal and candy meal are probably the two highest feeds, commodity feeds that are out there. When I was in grad school, we fed lots and lots of M&Ms. Cows love M&Ms. So if you can find something like that, you can make stuff work and get into some non-traditional feeds and use them for your weaning ration. But when you start getting into any of the weird feeds, keep it at 5% of the diet or less, because then you don't have problems with it. Creep grazing. If you're going totally and completely forages, no grain whatsoever, creep grazing is a way to look at doing this. Now, there are a couple different ways to do this. You can forward graze. So if you're rotationally grazing, let the calves go first. They can pick out the best forage, and then let the cows come along after them. That lets them take the tops of the forages off. They get the best nutrients possible. Or you can set up a creep grazing area. So you can take a small section of the pasture, set it up so that only the calves can get into it, and that's generally where, if you're going to do it that way, that's where you want to plant your annuals. When you're looking at weaning in the next month or so, ryegrass, rye, wheat, triticale, anything where the small grains, get them up. It's a really, really high quality forage. You get the animal in there. Those calves can go in there and start eating, and they really perform well. Again, weaning, just do it. Again, I don't care which weaning method you use. Pick one and go for it. Post-weaning nutrition. Well, this is going to depend a lot on our marketing plans. If we're going to take those animals and we're going to wean them and then we're going to take them to the sale barn, there is no post-weaning nutrition. It's called the Kenworth method of weaning. Load them up, put them on the Kenworth, and send them down the road. If you're going to do an organized sale, most of them have some sort of rules as to how they want those animals fed, whether it's grain, whether it's forages. Go with what you're going to do for the organized sale. If you're doing private treaty, if you're selling seed stock, if you're selling bulls, if you're selling heifers, there are some different things you can do there. A lot more people now that are getting into the full forage want bulls that are developed totally on forages. So if that's what you're trying to do, that's where you want to look at the annuals and ways that you can really maximize their production. When you start getting into freezer beef and you're trying to market these animals for freezer beef, we want the highest quality feed or the highest quality meat possible. How many of y'all have had really good grass-fed beef? Man, that's rough. I've had one piece in my life that was absolutely delicious. One piece, ever. But it was a truly finished piece of beef. It was not, all right, we fed it to 1,100 pounds and it gained some weight and it was all on grass. But his marketing strategy was for grass-fed beef. It was all done on annuals, very, very high energy levels. I guarantee you, if you compare it to a choice cut of beef, you couldn't tell the difference. The marbling was there. It looked great. If you look at most grass-fed beef out there, it's nasty. And part of that is because it's not truly finished. Yes, it's grass-fed, but it's not a finished product because it doesn't have that marbling that we expect to see that gives it that flavor. So when you start looking at freezer beef, if you actually want to sell good quality products, you've got to look at your forages if you're going with all grass. Now, if you're doing grain-finished freezer beef, please call me because I like balancing rations, and it's fun to do. And there, with freezer beef or finishing beef on grain, there's a million different ways you can do it, and there are a million different things you can put into it. That's kind of the sky. You're limited only by your imagination. I finished beef on beans, on M&Ms, on the weirdest one I've ever done was feeding guacamole. Yes, sir.
Does aging make much difference?
Yes. Yeah, that's probably the easiest answer that I can give you is just yes. It makes it better.
What would you say would be the minimum for calling it aged, cured?
I don't know. That's a meat science question. I'd want it, for me personally, if I was going to market it as aged beef, I'd want it hanging for 2 weeks. But when you start looking at trying to figure out the ways to do that, you can't go to the store and buy aged beef. The packing plants just don't have the capacity to age beef anymore. Our requirements are so high. What we're trying to do, there's so much, trying to get beef onto the market because we are in a short supply of beef right now. They just don't have the capacity or the ability to truly age beef. So if you're going to get aged beef, it's going to be from a custom slaughter plant, or you're going to have to do it. You're not going to go to the store and buy aged beef that's really aged. Male or female? And this makes a difference in how we want those animals to gain. If we're dealing with steers, we want them to gain just as much weight as absolutely possible. If we're doing heifers and they're going to market, if they're going to be finished out just like the steers are, then we want them to gain as much weight as absolutely possible. If we're looking at replacement heifers, we want them gaining between 1.5 and 2 pounds a day. We don't want them gaining over 2 pounds a day. Does anybody know why? Too fat. If heifers gain more than 2 pounds a day, where's the first place they put down fat? In the udder. Put down fat in the udder, it permanently reduces the amount of milk that animal can produce. If you look at, it's called the grand dam effect. If you look at a really high milking cow and she has a heifer calf, generally that heifer is not going to milk as heavily as her mother does. But then you get to her daughter, and since her mama didn't produce much milk, you get the granddaughter, and she's going to be high milking again because she didn't have that extra milk and that extra weight gain. So you're going to hit, it'll be high milk production, low milk production, high milk production, low milk production. And there's some ways that you can do that. If you've got a really good milking cow and she has a heifer calf, put her on the crappiest pasture you've got. Just put them out there. She'll milk less. You won't have the grand dam effect issues. If you have a really high milking cow and she has a steer, put her on the best pasture that you've got. Get your money out of that milk. Depending on whether we're trying to raise market animals or breeding animals, we want to change how we're raising those animals. Now, bulls, how much do we want bulls gaining? As much as possible? If you're selling bulls, yeah. If you're trying to buy a bull, you don't want them gaining that fast because they have the same problem that heifers do. They're going to get fat. It's not going to affect their reproductive abilities unless you just turn them out on the fescue pasture in the middle of July. And then all that extra fat will. But we do. We want our bulls gaining from a production standpoint, at a more moderate rate of gain. But if you look at these bull tests, they're pushing those bulls to gain just as hard as they possibly can. Again, it depends on your marketing. If you're marketing bulls, you want them gaining a lot. If you're buying bulls, not so much. Tips for starting calves. Start them early. Let their mamas show them what to do. And if you're going to make a change in their diet, do it slowly. We don't want to take them off of grass and dump them on a full feedlot ration the next day. You will have a train wreck. If you're going to start building them up to some starch in their diet, again, start out at less than 5% of their diet changing at any one time. it takes about 2 weeks for the rumen microbes to change over. So if you're starting out on full forage and you're going to go to a feedlot ration, change it a little bit, let them get used to it for 2 weeks because that let those rumen microbes shift, then change it a little bit more and wait for another 2 weeks. Use a step up, add more corn each time or more grain each time. Start out with 5%. After that, you can bump it a little bit more. The next time, you can go up to 20% corn or 20% grain and 80% forage. And you could probably go 50-50. But you've got to give those microbes time to change over. The other thing that you want to do is you want to make sure you've got lots of roughage in the diet if you're going to start feeding starch. The more roughage we have in the diet, the more it causes production of sodium bicarbonate in the saliva, which keeps the rumen pH at a neutral. How many of y'all ever dealt with acidosis feeding cattle? Nobody. If you drop the pH of the rumen too quickly, or if you drop it at all, you'll burn off the papillae in the rumen, and you'll affect that animal's ability to absorb the nutrients out of the rumen. So if you look at the rumen, there are a lot of little finger-like projections that stick out into the rumen to increase the surface area so that animal can absorb more nutrients. When you make that animal become acidotic, so if we drop the pH in the rumen, which is normally at 7 to 3, the acid actually burns those papillae off. They never grow back. So we reduce that animal's ability to digest the feed and absorb it. So, again, slow changes and watch out. All right, if we're looking at feeding for performance, start these calves out, and this is a study that looked at comparing corn and soybean meal versus corn and a calf starter. Started out at about the same weight when we weaned them, then we put them on a truck and shipped them, and they both lost about 30 pounds on a truck ride. Now we're talking moving them from Virginia to the Corn Belt. When we start looking 31 days later, they've gained back what they lost and then some. Look at average daily gain up to weaning or from weaning. The ones that were eating corn and soybean meal gained less than the ones eating the calf starter. Once they arrive, their average daily gain from them, we see the same thing. That calf starter put on more gain. Now the calf starter is a ration that's formulated for weaning calves. How many of y'all use that? It's called Jump Start at Southern States. Several people? All right. It's expensive. If you look at the cost of Jump Start, it's up there. But when you start looking at the cost of gain between those two diets, whether it's a calf starter or just using a mixed ration that's not designed for those calves, cost of gain, and this is per hundredweight, we're looking at $51 versus $52. So $1 difference in gain per hundredweight. So 10 cents a pound. That's something. Break even, again, it's about $1 difference. So some of the times when we're dealing with weaning these animals, putting extra money into them, it's an investment. We're not trying to do cheapest cost possible. We're trying to make the most money. This runs into a problem sometimes with farming because you don't go to the coffee shop and brag about profit. You go to the coffee shop and you brag about average daily gain and weaning weights. And yes, there are people out there who would rather have bragging rights than more money. I promise. When we start looking at being successful in getting these animals off, feed intake is what it comes down to. If you get those calves eating, you're going to be successful. The longer it takes you to get them to start eating again after you've weaned them, the less successful you're going to be. Stress and animal health go hand in hand, and that's probably the biggest factor in getting those animals back to eating again. The less stress on them, the faster they're going to start eating again. When we start looking at, this is for going into a feedlot, whether they're weaned or unweaned. If you've got calves that have been weaned for 30 days or 45 days and then you ship them to the feedlot, they're going to perform better than calves that were taken off the mothers, put on the truck, and shipped immediately, all day long. The age of the calf. The older that calf is, the less stress you're going to put on it when you do stuff to it. They just get used to it. and it doesn't bother them as much. If you think about people, it works the same way. If you take a 5-year-old and make them do something and then do the same thing to a 10-year-old, that 10-year-old is going to be under less stress because they've experienced more. They've dealt with it before. Weight. Heavier animals, you don't see as much of an issue and as much of a drop-off in their weight when you wean them as you do with lighter weight animals. Now, the opposite of that is you don't see as much compensatory gain when they start coming back on the larger animals. Previous ration, when we move them, the previous ration has a lot to do with how well they're going to perform on the next one. So going from straight milk to a straight feedlot ration is not the best thing to do. So the previous ration has a lot. And then body condition score. If you start taking an animal that hasn't been cared for very well, that's in a low body condition score, whether it's because his mama didn't milk or whether it's because somebody just didn't feed him, and then you start adding stress onto that, they're just not as well able to deal with it. So their body condition has a lot to do with that. Feed intake. Healthy versus sick. How many of y'all eat less when you're sick? Calves do it too. When you look at calves that come into a feedlot that are healthy, these are the ones that are generally backgrounded, that are weaned and ready to go into the feedlot. They're going to gain about 1.5 pounds for their first 7 days there, the first week. Calves that get weaned that are a little bit sick, whether it's just shipping fever, gain about 0.5 pound less, 0.6 pounds less for that first week. When you go to 28 days, we're looking at 2.7 pounds versus 1.8 pounds. That's almost a pound a day difference. When you start looking at those 1 to 56 days, we're at 3 pounds versus 2.68. Now, at this point in time, what you're seeing here isn't that all of a sudden these guys they get over that sickness and then they can start catching up, but they never do. There's not enough time. So they always eat less than the ones that come in healthy. Stress. We want to keep the animals as low stress as possible when we're doing this, and I know I've harped on this, but it's really important. When you're doing the handling, generally the lower stress you work the animals through, it's a lot higher stress on the people. When you start thinking, all right, well, this one's not moving, so let me twist her tail and get her through faster, that puts more stress on the animal. If you're trying to hold back and not do that, it's a little bit more stressful on you. You can be stressed. That's okay. We're worried about the stress on the animals. So no yelling, no hitting them, no shoving, no arm waving, no running, no shocking. How many of y'all like a hot shot? I watched a person get hit with a hot shot on his ear one time, and I've never used one again. So, when we're working these animals, we really have to do as much as possible to keep the stress just as low as possible. Age, the older the calf, the less weaning impacts it. So if we went to wean this guy versus this calf, which one's going to have the most stress on it by being weaned? The little one. And I'm pretty sure this one's already weaned and has been staying in a show barn in the air conditioning forever. So I don't think he's very stressed, but it's a good picture. Weight, heavier weight calves, they're going to come out eating more. They're going to be healthier. Again, it's just a weight. The bigger the animal, the more space in the room and the more they can eat. Previous ration. All right, this is where we get back into that. Grain versus grass. If they've been grained, generally they're heavier animals. They've gotten more energy into them, and they're used to the ration. So if you take an animal that's been backgrounded on grain and send it to a feedlot, it's going to perform better than one that's been backgrounded on straight grass. Now, if you're not retaining ownership to the feedlot, why does that matter? It doesn't. We need to promote the industry and produce as much beef as possible, but as producers, we need to maximize our profit. Feedlots make lots of money. We don't need to worry about their profit. So when you're starting to figure out whether you're going to use grain in a ration or not, to background these animals or to get them started after weaning or even creep feeding them, you need to look at it from your profit standpoint. Don't worry about the guys at the feedlot, unless you're retaining ownership, and then that's a different story. But you've got to do it to maximize your profit. If we do it on grass, straight grass, we lower the feed bill. There's no way that you can feed animals on grain as cheaply as you can feed them on grass. Now, that's assuming you've got good grass. The rumen microbes are different. When we're feeding grass, when they're grazing, the rumen microbes are set up to digest grass. When you start looking at grain, it changes those microbes. There's no change in feeding. If we go from a calf that's about 6 months old, when we're weaning it, it's going to be eating grass and drinking milk. All you're doing is taking the milk away. There's not as big of a shock to the system to go from grass and milk to grass as it is to go from grass and milk to grain. So there's a little bit, you get a little bit of a benefit there just by having it being a little bit lower stress on that animal. Again, body condition, health status, hair coat score, and time of the year are all conditions that can affect weaning. You want them in good body condition score. We're going to shoot for a 6. 5s are okay, 7s are okay, 4s are not, 8s are definitely not. So, we want to manage for a good body condition score. We want good health status. We want to vaccinate our calves. We don't want to start weaning when they got runny noses or pink eye. Time of the year, weather can have a huge impact on weaning. Who would have wanted to wean calves last week? This week is much better. The other thing, when you start weaning, you're getting these animals, it's their most efficient time ever. Don't wean your animals if they don't have good feed. If you've got hay, we don't ever wean on hay. Nutrition, we got to get the most intake possible, flat out. They're weaned, we need to get nutrients into them. We're not going to get the same amount of nutrients into them as we were when they were drinking milk. We just can't do it. That's why it's up there twice. Or no, intake and nutrients, that's close enough. When we start looking at feeds, if we're going to do a grain feed, 16% crude protein at a minimum for weaning calves. They're trying to build muscle. Muscle takes protein. We've got to get it into them. Average daily gain of heifers, we want less than 2 pounds a day. But we want more than 1.5 pounds. We want them gaining, we just don't want them putting down fat. Steers, if they're not gaining 2 pounds a day, we're doing something wrong, and we need to fix it. Going from grass to grain, slow changes, and low starch. Start off with low starch. Distiller's grains, again, we've done this before. Cottonseed hulls. Anything that says hull in it, except there are a couple feeds out there that we don't want to feed. Peanut hulls. If you need to stop your animal from gaining weight, feed it peanut hulls. Rice hulls. If you want to stop your animal from gaining weight, feed it rice hulls. Both of those feeds are really high in fiber. They're not very digestible. So if you've got a show steer that you need to slope to back up some, but you want it to keep eating, those are good feeds then. Otherwise, they're not very good. Feeds to avoid when we're looking at weaning. Chicken litter. I know it's cheap. It's great for cows. You can finish animal steers on chicken litter. It's a good feed, but not at weaning. Gin trash. How many of y'all live near a cotton gin? Can you get gin trash cheap? It's a good feed, sort of. If they put trash in the name of it, that should tell you something about the feed. If you can get it cheap enough, use it. But, they're going to flat out tell you it's trash. But it's not something we want to use when we're weaning calves. Peanut hulls. Again, high in fiber, not much else to it. If you want them to lose weight, feed them peanut hulls. Same thing with rice hulls. Rice hulls are really high in silicate too. Their digestibility is very low. They'll slow down digestibility of everything else if you start feeding rice hulls. Corn. The only reason to avoid corn, and this goes for wheat and barley too, is because it's high in starch. Otherwise, and I guess avoid wouldn't be the best term. Maybe minimize would be better for corn and wheat. We just don't want to feed a lot of starch.
How about mixing the corn and peanut oil?
You can do that.
I used to really milk on peanut oil. A lot of the dairy fed it. I know, I've seen it happen.
They do.
They milk good on eating peanuts. They did, I don't know if they did or didn't do.
Part of it, and there are a few different things there. It used to be that when they fed peanut hulls,
Peanuts in there, cold peanuts.
there were cold peanuts in there too, but the skins of the peanuts were also in there too. Now, they're selling peanut skins separately than peanut hulls. So if you look at those peanut, the skins, if you can buy peanut skins, those are awesome. They're really high in protein. There's a lot of fat in that skin. And that's really high in energy. So that's one of the differences now is when you start looking at peanut hulls now versus 20 years ago or 30 years ago, they take those skins out now. So it's really a different feed than what you used to see feeding them at the dairy.
You can pick your bags up. And the heavy bags, I love peanuts. So, that's one thing through.
When we start looking at weaning on grass, annuals are king. Ryegrass, rye, wheat, triticale, small grains, plant them once, graze them, really, really high quality forage. It's great for weaning. Forward grazing, and if you are weaning on grass and you're not doing a true grass only operation, look at something that's low starch like soybean hulls to get some of that forage friendly fiber in there. You can actually increase their digestion of grass and help you out some. Do not wean on hay. Now, if you look at this hay down here, I know that's a pretty green color. We don't want to feed that. And this is stuff that's been sitting out long enough that it's actually starting to sprout again. Now, if there's that many seeds in there, it wasn't that high quality to begin with because it had already gone to seed and they're viable. Now, average Virginia hay. Average hay. 9% crude protein or less. 60% TDN or less. Most of the time it's the less part. I've tested hay in this area that will starve a cow to death with a full stomach. We don't want to feed that. We really don't want to feed it when we're weaning. So, when you start looking at weaning, you don't want them on hay, you want them on a good quality feed so they can actually gain some weight. Take homes. Wean your calves. I don't care how you do it, but get it done. Keep the stress as low as possible, and good feed is the key. Now, here's my last pitch as a nutritionist. Nutrition is more important than anything else. Flat out. Reproduction doesn't matter because if they're not fed right, they're not going to breed. Health doesn't matter because if they're not fed right, they're not going to stay healthy. Genetics don't matter because if they're not fed right, they're not going to live up to their genetic potential. Nutrition's the base of everything. So make sure you have good feed. And yes, I am a nutritionist and I am biased. Any questions?
What do you consider a good feed?
First off, something that they'll eat. If they don't eat it, it's not good. And then it depends on what stage of production they're in. You want something that's highly digestible. For most of the time, on growing animals, we want 14 to 16% crude protein at a minimum, and preferably 80 to 90% TDN.
So what about the average roll of bale hay?
It's not good feed.
That's what I'm
Yeah, the average hay is not good feed. It will work for a dry cow. If you start looking at hay that's submitted to the different testing facilities, most of it in our area, so fescue, orchard grass, cool season grasses east of the Mississippi, will meet the crude protein requirements for most cows. All right, if you get in the ones that are really milk and heavy, then you're going to run into some issues with protein. Where we really fall short with our hays in meeting the animal's requirements is energy. It's the most limiting nutrient that's out there in this part of the world. If we get east of the Mississippi River, it changes. Those grasses are generally higher in energy and lower in protein.
We are east of the Mississippi.
I'm sorry, west of the Mississippi. I'm a little bit directionally challenged. But yeah, west of the Mississippi, they're high in energy, low in protein. In this area, we're high in protein, low in energy. So what we need to look at when we're supplementing these animals is energy. But when you go to the store, what do you buy your feed based on? Price. Price is one thing. We're talking nutrients that you buy your feed on. It's protein.
I have one more question.
All right.
Like most of our hay bales are orchard grass, fescue, and some clover.
Okay.
Now, from your point of view, what are we looking at in terms of good or bad?
It depends on how you make it. Do you test your hay? You should test your hay. That's the best thing you can do when you're trying to figure out that. Now, all right, there are some caveats there. If you're going to feed the hay and you're not going to change your feeding strategy at all, no matter how the tests come back, then don't test your hay because that's just a waste of money. If you're willing to make changes in your feeding strategy, test your hay, because then you can feed what you need to feed to meet the requirements of the animal and match it to your hay. So if you've got hay that's high in energy and you made it at the right time and the weather was great and you hit it perfect and you've got 70% TDN hay, that's 14% crude protein, you're good to go. You won't have to worry about it. If you go out and you get the average Virginia hay that's 6% crude protein and 52% TDN, then we've got to change some stuff. But really, it comes down to test your hay so we can know what you've got. There's no way to just go out and look at a bale of hay and say, all right, this is good hay and this is bad hay. You can tell the bad stuff when it's really bad. But no, test your hay. And then we can go from there. Any other questions? I'll lie. I don't have a problem doing that. Y'all can ask me something.
Just think, Brian,